Hello, everyone. This is Professor Hamamoto. It is December 30th, year 2021, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, broadcasting from beautiful Sacramento, California, otherwise known as Hollywood for ugly people, not just physically, but spiritually. So, my gosh, tomorrow's New Year's Eve, another one entered into the books. 2021, a harrowing year that followed 2020, an incredibly hit that we took that year. And now we're moving into 2022. You know what? I'm looking forward to it. I'm not expecting some sort of panacea, some sort of magical elected official coming down to heal us or to promise something that's going to lift us out of our situation. I am depending on myself and I'm depending on you, people around us within this independent community. And what we've learned over the past 2 years is that we don't need no stinking badges. Right? We don't need no superheroes. We don't need Batman, right? In order to or put the bat signal up there for someone to the Cape Crusader to come down here and rescue us. We'll take our business on our own. We just need to have the people who think they have authority over us, and it's we have the authority, we have the sovereign authority. But the people who think they have authority over us, we just need them to back off, right? And we've been discussing over the past year how we go about that. Now, my strategy is to go in deep so far as culturally deep. I call it cultural forensics, to go in deeply into the cultural history to see the genesis of these forms of oppression that over time, it doesn't take long, it takes less than a generation. Over time, it becomes naturalized. Just like you see on the street, some of these people still wearing the masks. See how quickly, less than 2 years, it's become a fixture on their faces, on their heads. And of course, we have example upon example of this taking place. So my strategy is to dig into, and today, of course, we're going to go in specifically to this concept of cognitive dissonance. And yes, I know you've heard it many, many times. And I'll warn you again, this is my usual caveat. Don't try to understand me too quickly here, because I have a lot more to present that you might think you already have under your belt. I'm pretty sure you don't. And that's one of the tricks, by the way, of the people who present this word magic, this magical universe to us. They gull us, or they have us believe that we know it, we got it. Oh yeah, we understand it, that we have mastered everything that's being thrown at us. And that's one of the more benign methods that they use, they meaning the handlers, the psychosocial engineers, that they use in order to get over on us, right? We think it's the men or the women in the powder blue helmets or the uniforms with the truncheons and with the gas, right? The bear gas that are the immediate threat. But the more subtle socio-psycho behavioral scientists, these people, and I'm going to talk about one of the major ones today, these are the ones that we got to watch out for. So, and of course, it comes from the most unexpected places. In this case, I didn't name it. It's a remote Midwestern university. The more I think about it, the more it makes sense that this whole plan of this whole engineered cognitive dissonance, it makes sense why it would come from the Midwest in this particular area, Minnesota in specific. And I'm thinking, my gosh, maybe Prince Nile Rodgers, is it Nile Rodgers or Prince Rodgers? Right, I'm thinking of Nile Rodgers, the musician, who also seems to have been under some sort of hallucinogenic LSD control. I'll find out soon because I just ordered his autobiography. But Prince Rodgers from Minneapolis, I'm wondering if he wasn't found out. I mean, he was a talented kid, I'm sure, but I wonder if he was not scouted really early on and brought into one of these University of Minnesota training programs, which are really a form of academic grooming, right? We see this time and time again. And of course, he was murdered a few years ago because he has a huge catalog. And secondly, well, maybe primarily it's because he defied the music combines, the monopolies. When you do that, you tend to wind up dead. Look at Michael Jackson. So this material has escaped the laboratory. It wasn't just some sort of Wuhan virus. This stuff has been pouring out of academia for decades and decades, especially during the post-war period, where all the money started going there. They say, hey, this is working. This can bear some fruit, and plus we can make tons of money on it. We can figure out how to manipulate people into buying products and services they don't need with the new medium of television, right? So before I go into that, I want to welcome, since you're all here and patiently waiting for me to get on with the show here. But first, I have to acknowledge Schickle Tuber. Is that a rhyme with Schickle Gruber? Hey, Happy New Year to you, 2022. It's going to be a good one. 88 Solansky, yes. How are you doing? Welcome. Piper Fogel, yes. You've been here every single time for the past year, just like me. And Melissa, how are you today? Good. Michael Charlie, Marcia Ezel, how are you today? Oh, I'm glad to have you join us in real time. And oh yeah, 96 Tears, question mark in the Mysterians. And Maureen says she's looking forward to the interview with Manny. Oh yeah, while I'm on that topic, that's going to happen. I'm not going to give you the date because I don't want my phone to ring exactly when we're going to start. But we've set a time, and it's going to be very, very soon into the new year, and it's going to be good. I mean, I don't like to hype stuff up, but I have a really strong feeling it's going to be good. Just like I had a very strong feeling about the Kirby Summers interview, which I'll talk about in a moment, just very briefly, because we have a lot of material to cover. Swan 432. Yeah, I'm going to be exploring 432 hertz as well in my own work very soon. I have 10 rhythm tracks already set up, ready to go, and I'll be working on them starting probably tonight or tomorrow over the holiday, the New Year's holiday. Julie Smith, how are you? Ayape, how are you? Super Java Bean. Yes, I had my Java Beans today. Welf Winter, welcome to our mobster for Timothy Judd. Wow, there's a lot of new people here. Lion Salinas, welcome here. And hey, Kathy Sue. Yes, I got your message about Dr. George Odell refuses to go away. Tyrone Sargent, hey, welcome. Haven't seen you for a while, but I welcome you here for the new year. Tom Colby, yes. And Synthesophone, I'm sorry, I can't, it's really hard to read. It's really tiny print. And I can't make it pop out here. Julie Smith, Tropiskunk. Wow, everybody's here today. DJ, yes. Tom Colby. Jay Agraire. I'm sorry if I missed your name. Ramzi Rabi. Yes, I'm sorry if I skip your name. I don't mean to ignore you. It's just, it's going by really quickly. Christopher Lee, and there's tons of people. And I need to get on with the motley here. I Gabby, yes. Rhoda R. Original Larry, yes. Good to see you. Okay. Janet Kostrovsky, hi, hey, hello from Greece. We'll be joining you in the global financial crisis very soon. And Master Lee Pablo Sandoval from Amsterdam, wonderful. I'm really into the Dutch diaspora, the hidden hand. No one really gives them the credit. The House of Orange, enough credit, that is. Allison M. By the way, as I mentioned before, as the Dutch diaspora, as the House of Oranges was colonizing the New World, New Amsterdam, they are also trying to colonize Asia. So that's the connection there. In fact, they were trying to get into Japan before they were getting into what later became New Amsterdam and New York. It's a global history. The world has been a global society for 500 years, if not more. We don't even know the full history yet. Hey, listen, I'm blathering on, so let me get on with the show here. And again, I apologize if I did not call your name. I'll get to, if you're a regular guest here, I will call out your name, I'm sure. So, very briefly, the Kirby Summers interview went incredibly well. I thought it would, but I don't like to jinx myself. Okay, I am somewhat superstitious, and I found out, by the way, that for those of you, you lucky readers and viewers who listened to my advice and told you to buy multiple copies of this book, guess what? They're all sold out. That really, it fills me with joy, especially given her background, her hardships, and her lifelong dream, even as a child, of wanting to be a published writer. Okay, man, she's selling copies, and it's a good book too. I mean, this is a good. We talked a lot about Ghislaine Maxwell, but we ranged a little bit outside of that box as well, and it was a excellent interview. But the important information is that on New Year's Day, yes, I'm to be with you. I'm not going to be watching the super irritable bowel. I don't know what kind of satanic halftime show is going to be on there, but I'm sure it's going to be the usual, and it's going to be the usual commentators who says, "Oh yeah, did you know that the Super Bowl is a cultic celebration? Oh, come on, tell me something new." All right, and I'm being really kind of mean-spirited about it because we're tired of hearing this, and I'm tired of supposed indie, you know, insiders who have all this incredible information to share with us. You know what? Everybody knows already, so start digging a little bit deeper, and we'll thank you for it. Um, so anyway, it's going to be January 1st, right? New Year's Day, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. It's going to run almost 2 hours. And boy, it's not a single minute of of boredom in there or even a lapse. It's just like a train going straight ahead. Anyway, you'll find out. And I have to do a little bit of production tweaking. There's a little of a sound distortion at the beginning. I have to kind of tweak it before I post, and it takes a long time to upload into YouTube, so it's not on there yet. But I'm telling you anyway. So look forward, and you want to put the waiting feature. You want to subscribe so that you'll get the notification. It'll come up automatically on New Year's Day. And tonight, yes, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, I'm going to be rejoining my friend and colleague, Mr. John O'Loughlin, tonight on McDuff Lives, and we're going to catch up on events of the past month going into year 2022. So I'm looking forward to that this evening, this afternoon, and I'll see you there, hopefully. Please come and join us. We'll have a lot to catch up on and to look forward to. All right, let me go into the talk, the introduction here. First of all, I want to begin with a person who you may or may not have heard of. You know his work, and you're being influenced by his research and his whole school of followers, not just in the academic world, but in the marketing world and the world of Showtime and HBO and Netflix. His influence, his impact, and those of his cohorts and his descendants has had an inestimable impact on creating what I call the Dissociative Society Disorder. Yes, we're tracing it back today to Professor Leon Festinger. It's spelled Festinger. And first I thought, I knew about him, but I thought, gosh, I'm going to look in his background. Could he be one of those paperclip guys? Because we know that, well, you know about paperclip, but you may not know that a lot of people came in prior to paperclip as academics, and they came from Germany. They came from Third Reich, Germany, but almost all were Jews. They were people who graduated from the University of Berlin, or University of Heidelberg, University of Munich, right? All the great institutions of learning. But they preceded Paperclip. And I thought Leon Festinger might have been one of these people. But no, he was the second generation Jewish American Russian, and his family comes from that area, that Galicia area, where a lot of the mind control, behavior science, surrealistic, dissonant, dissociative type artists and intellectuals come from. They come from that geographic area. And I think, and by the way, so did so did Robert Maxwell. That's where he comes. That's where his people come from. And the reason that I pointed out in the past, and I wasn't going to talk about this today, but I think it should be mentioned in passing, because Festinger is a descendant of this particular occultic milieu. And by the way, his father was a lifelong atheist, radical socialist, and that seems to go hand in hand with this amorality by which these people ply their trade. And I'll also say that some of the people that figure in the story of Ghislaine Maxwell, some of the secondary figure, very important, but secondary behind Robert Maxwell, in other words, have that same background. And by the way, it's not a Jewish thing specifically. It's mostly British. The people who've been mostly be pushing that agenda are Anglo-Saxon types or Teutonic types who may ostensibly be Christian, whether it's Protestant or Roman Catholic. They're the ones that have been really, it's working together. It's kind of a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious enterprise is evil. They'll take anybody who has something to offer. Let's call them illuminists, right? To the people who supposedly have the shining light of God, or whoever. It's probably Satan, not God, but whoever that they respond to so far as doing their evil. And I'm sure Professor Festinger and his followers, they probably view themselves as righteous people. They might be agnostic or even outright atheists. Or non-religious, let's say, right, indifferent to religion, but they're still doing the Luciferian project here. You don't have to be aware of it to be executing it. In fact, you're probably a better tool if you're ignorant of the metaphysics of what you're doing to the world, and ultimately what you're doing to yourself and your own family and your friends and the large. You may not care about the larger society, but maybe you care about your children or your grandchildren or your family. Maybe you don't. Maybe you take them, like some of the colleagues I had, and donate them to the projects. And this one colleague of mine donated his daughter, and she became a boy through hormonal treatment. And he donated his daughter, his son, to become a girl. And that's just one really dramatic example that I'm acquainted with. So maybe B.F. Skinner put his own daughter in his own Skinner box, and I believe she committed suicide at an early stage in her life. So some of these people have a complete amorality. I know that's a redundancy, complete amorality. Yeah, but I can't think of a stronger word to trump amorality, right? Let's call it uber amorality, because some people are slightly short of complete amorality. And this talk today is directed at you people right there, the people there who are kind of teetering on the edge of outright evil, carrying out the agenda, whether it's deep state, new world order, whatever you want to call it, the takeover, the great reset, right? You may be kind of teetering here, but I think a lot of you, after the past 2 years, have taught you a bitter lesson about who your masters really are. I think after that experience, some of you are having a crisis of faith. How do I know? I've had contact with some of them, including some of my former colleagues, and said, we were wrong to ostracize you. We were wrong to fire you, get you fired and set you up, and being dismissed prematurely from the University of California, which meant a loss in lots of salary, benefits, and, well, who cares about Social Security? That's isn't about ready to crash. But there's material losses and whatnot. So I know you're out there, and this is you're not alone. That's the good news. There's a whole huge reawakening people who are in public service, private corporations. You may be in the child protective services, teaching, whatnot, social services, but we're all in jeopardy. And I'm not going to judge you because I think for the most part, like Professor Festinger, you didn't really know that you were either devising or implementing and executing what is at bottom a Luciferian agenda, right? But as you know, it's never too late to repent of your deeds and straighten up and fly right, as the old song goes. So, Professor Leon Festiger, born in the U.S. to immigrant parents from this Galicia region, right? So, and then I'm going to conclude this talk because he's history, right? People in psychology, sociology, the social sciences, policy, they know about him. And so he's a moldy fit, right? But no, he's not. Again, you don't try to understand this too quickly because I'm going to be concluding today's talk with a discussion of an individual who resurrects Professor Festiger's discovery, right? Which was made way back in 1947, shortly after World War II. You notice how all this work comes out of World War II? It's not a coincidence because this is a military operation. And what do militaries do? Right? They apply violence to destroy and to level, right? And it's not just armies with uniforms on, it's civilian populations now that we are the enemy, right? That's why the Surgeon General of the United States Health Service wears a military uniform. He's a commissioned, or she is a commissioned officer. I've mentioned this before, time and time again. There are many, many examples, but Professor Festinger didn't have to wear a uniform, military uniform. He didn't have to be even an ROTC to have a military function. You can be a civilian and be engaged in a military project. And by the way, when I say military, we were no longer, in his day, yes, but today, we're no longer talking about the US military. We're talking about NATO and the United Nations. NATO has taken over the Pentagon. It has fused, and they've come together. And that was the plan all along as part of some people call it colloquially the Fourth Reich. And I'll just use that terminology, but today it's called NATO. And they have brand spanking new luxurious headquarters where is it? It's in Belgium someplace, right? One of those friendly nations that, like Switzerland, that in truth really run everything. Okay, so we're going to go into this academic psychologist, and it's not going to be as boring as it might sound. This psychologist who claims to have unlocked he's going to explain to us the whole psychodynamics behind the QAnon conspiracy. And in doing so, he's going to talk about all the bitter clingers, the quote unquote rednecks, the angry white males, and the usual. He's going to go in on and of course the anathema himself, Orange Man. He's going to go in on Donald Trump to show how Professor Leon Festinger, way back in 1946-47, was really talking about, with his great foresight, about what's taking place in 2021. 2020, 2021, right? That ill-fated election, January 6th. My gosh, this has been an incredible year. So this is hang on, we're gonna get to this, and I'll make sure that I give ample time to that last part of it. But first of all, let me finish up with Professor Festinger. More of you are acquainted with the famous Stanford prison experiment, right? 1971. That's right, Philip G. Lombardo at Stanford. And by the way, Festinger wound up at Stanford I think it was around 60, 61 by that time. So he preceded Lombardo, right? Is that his name, Lombardo? Yeah. Philip Lombardo. He preceded them. I don't know if they had any professional connection. They were generationally sort of, one was going out and one was coming in, right? Lombardo was a bright, young, brilliant social scientist, and Festinger had already become like the eminence of the profession and established. But he was at Stanford as well, and that's why, I'm mentioning this, because a lot of people think they know all about Stanford through the SRI and the remote viewing and PSI and Hal Puthoff and, the usual, that's important, but there's much more to the story than that. And most of you are familiar with Stanley Milgram, right? The famous obedience to authority study that took place at Yale University, right? Skull and Bones East meets Skull and Bones West, right? Just like Bernard Crick over at sunny La Jolla, California on the West Coast. You got there, right? The Scripps Institute for Behavioral Studies. And on the East side, you've got James B. Watson, right? Okay. So you got, those gentlemen, but few of you who are not in the academic world are familiar with a social science study called When Prophecy Fails. When Prophecy Fails. And this was published way back in 56. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I think it was. And the remote Midwestern university that I alluded to in the description today is none other than the University of Minnesota. And then it finally dawned on me. Now I know why there was all this violence on the street in Minneapolis, St. Paul, right? These shootings and later a trial. And I mean, I never saw Minnesota, definitely not St. Paul and Minneapolis, Minnesota. I never saw them as really primed for that type of outbreak of violence. But if you listen to what I'm about to tell you, then it makes sense why that would occur there. I think that might have been run out of the University of Minnesota, the most recent violence. And I think I'm suspecting, I don't know. You'll have to tell me. And if there's an informant who's working at the University of Minnesota, you're a grad student or something, or you're one of those professors who have gotten tenure, so you think you're safe and you're not safe, by the way, even with tenure. So take that under advisement. But if you want to check into that, that would be an interesting study. I think a lot of that violence recently was coming out of the University of Minnesota. And for those of you, I don't know about the younger people, but those of you who are my boomer generation, as we are disparagingly referred to, do you remember, as I do, the Minnesota multiphasic personality inventory? That's a mouthful. The Minnesota multiphasic personality inventory. Well, you may not remember the name of it, but we were, as little kids, right? They were lining us up, right, to get all the polio vaccines, right? You know that whole story. You know about the whole subsequent cancer epidemic that followed that. You've read your Dr. Mary's Monkey, and you know about Ed Haslam and all that, right? While they were jabbing us, right, with all these incredible advances, I'm being sarcastic here. Most of you can pick it up. Incredible medical advances. They were administering as well the Minnesota multiphasic personality inventory. And today, ladies and gentlemen, to this very day, now I finally, in preparing for this talk today, I finally realize why whenever I see a number 2 pencil, I'm triggered. A number 2 pencil. So I said, oh yeah, that's going to be a song. I'm going to do a song. The title is going to be Number 2 Pencil. And it's a story about every time it's kind of like Tommy, Tommy, the dumb, deaf and dumb blind, that's his term, not mine. The deaf, dumb, blind boy who was buggered as a child. That made him go sensory haywire, right? He became deaf, dumb, and blind because wicked Uncle Ernie sodomized him, as a lot of the ruling class, not just Britain, but the U.S. and to a certain extent, the German-speaking countries, the elites. Let's just say elites are buggered, buggery, bastardy, and my whole tripartite analysis of power in society. So the premise of that song is very similar to Tommy, but my triggering mechanism is the number 2 pencil, right? Because the number 2 pencil, right? Filling in the little circles in the Minnesota multiphasic personality inventory. Yeah, I must have passed the standardized test pretty well because they spotted me early on and tried to groom me and raise me through the ranks. But something told me, just like Tommy, Tommy, can you hear me? Something was coming in, some frequency was escaping all the interference that was put out by Professor um, Festinger, and I managed to recover my soul. So it's never too late. What it was is music helped me. It's the free. That's why I'm going to do a song about number 2. It was the nonverbal, but music frequencies that unblocked those channels that were buggered. There was some sort of a device that was stuck in those channels. They try to bugger your mind. So anyway, I didn't mean to talk about my future 2022 projects. But those of you on Patreon, you're sponsoring me on those, and you're going to get the first look at number 2 pencil. By the way, I'm going to ask Manny. Some of you are watching his channel, which is great. That's another great development of 2021, the emergence of Manny Grossman. Wow, I'm very pleased with what's been going on for the past year. But Manny's a bass player, and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to ask him to do a track. I want him to play bass on number 2 pencil. I don't know how we're going to do it. We're going to have to send files back and forth. I have to figure out the techniques of it. See, I really welcome the lockdown. I really welcome the enclosure of us because it's made us more resourceful. Manny Grossman lost his job as a teacher of landscaping, and a lot of his landscape clients fell by the waysides because they thought he was a nutball conspiracy person. But he rose like a phoenix out of the ashes to create an incredible innovation in citizen journalism. I love it. So I want to commemorate that by doing a song together called Number 2 Pencil, or maybe it can be a suite. We can call it Getty Plaza Suite, right? Getty Plaza as in Yonkers, right? It's not J. Paul Getty. It's another Getty and that's a Swiss name too, right? We're going to name check the Swiss diaspora, just like the Dutch diaspora, because the other groups are getting all the flack. We want to share the inglorious bastardy with all the groups that deserve it, right? So as we're talking about all the great innovations in media in 2000, and that's when I came forward, right? Christmas Eve last year, going into the next year. As we're talking about independent media, I also want to stress that central to this talk today is that the alt-right and the indie media are providing grist. They are the other arm of this dialectic that's going on, right? They are complementing this bio-totalism, as I call it, right? It's the alt-right. It's the so-called independent media. In other words, I'm trying to explain it another way, that provides the opposite polarity. They're the negative, let's say, and then the CNN and Skeptical Inquiry and Newsweek magazine and the New York Times, Washington Post, right? That's the positive polarity. And then there's a negative. No wonder they call it bipolar syndrome. And then there's a negative polarity, right? And then you have that they contradict each other. And there you have cognitive dissonance, right? So InfoWars, Alex Jones, or people like him, Don Bongino and Ben Shapiro, or whoever else is out there, but I'll just say InfoWars because they're the 800-pound gorilla. They are really indispensable to creating this bipolar system, this cognitive dissonance, and they are instrumental in perpetuating what I call the dissociative society syndrome. All right. And, I'm saying this, I've been on a guest of Alex Jones, and Alan Oren Shrieker a couple times, even though he cut me off a couple times, and Alex Jones barely let me get a word out before interrupting me. But I've been a guest there, and I've been a friend of the show, and I've been a supporter. But I have to conclude, and this is in light of what's been developing in the case of President Donald J. Trump, because I think he's part of this dialect. I finally had to admit it to myself. In truth, I admitted it to myself, but publicly, I'm admitting it to you because it's important that we get this out before a larger audience so that we can have this discussion, a public discussion amongst ourselves. And not all the information is in it. All these individuals, just like the people who are doing the Luciferian work, all of them can turn out to be good guys, and we have to give them the opportunity to redeem themselves. And I don't want to get into his personal life or anything, but Alex Jones he announced it on his own show that his own wife was arrested for family abuse on Christmas Eve because she was on these, according to him now, it's not me, on this psychotropic drugs mixed with who knows what, but she had a freak out. And so the police were called and she was carted away, and now she has a police record. And I wish her a speedy recovery, full recovery. And I don't want to exploit the misery that she has to go through in her whole family. But that to me is more of a small scale cognitive dissonant message that I'm getting. I mean, isn't the Alex Jones show, isn't this the show where we had Dr. Blaylock talk about excitotoxins? And in the old days, we would have Dr. Leonard Horowitz talking about the dangers of pharmaceuticals. And in the old days, we would hear about selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. We would hear from people like Dr. Sherry Tenpenny warning us about the dangers that inhere in these psychotropics. And here in his own family, this problem evolves, sadly enough. And a house divided against itself will not stand. That was Abraham Lincoln. And similarly, on a macro level, a house divided against itself, we, the American Republic, will not stand. So this dissociativeness that's being fed by the alt-right is not healthy. It's got to stop, and it's going to be really easy to wean yourself away from it, because all it is, when I thought about it, I said, this is nothing more. Most of these shows are nothing more than headline fodder. It's just, oh, yeah, so-and-so said this. They're reading, oh, how stupid. Oh, yeah, look at so-and-so. Yeah, Putin, they're going to attack Ukraine. Oh, stupid. And it just goes on and on and on, right? It's so you see that this show is not, I don't ignore the headlines, but I don't make it the content of this show, right? That's their MO. That's the technique of creating the negative polarity versus the positive polarity of the cognitive neural network, as we call CNN, right? The network where all the these producers, let's call them, they're producing not news, they're producing evil. I don't have to go into that any deeper than that. So we have your Jimmy Kimmel as a comedian, as an actor, and then you've got your Fox and but then you have your Don Bongino and whoever else is out there. Rush Limbaugh's no more. Maybe even Michael Savage is part. I think so. I think he's part of the mass cognitive dissonance that we're seeing. So that's very important to go back into Festinger, because that was his contribution to the literature. Number one, the science, social science, not cognitive, the behavioral science literature. But that's his contribution, because to the media, to societies, to organizational goings on and management. This is what Festinger said. I'm investigating, and of course, I think he had in the back of his mind that, hey, it could get out of hand and it could be weaponized, right? I'm just trying to be that's how he justifies it. justifies it, rationalizes it, so I can go to sleep at night. I'm just doing the research here, and what other people do with it, well, that's really not my lookout. I mean, but it's going to be weaponized, and it certainly was. So, and that's why we have arrived at today what I call the dissociative disorder, or SDD, right? And it's not in your DSM, so, but that's that's my invention. All right. So the military attacks continue. These are cognitive dissonance attacks that we're seeing. They've been beta tested on civilian populations overseas. First in the Korean War, the whole Manchurian Candidate, and then in the Vietnam War, you had these cognitive dissonance attacks on the civilian population, Vietnamese people, and the soldiers as well, who were being fed LSD, hallucinogens, marijuana, and alcohol, of course. Very powerful opiates, right? This is the Vietnam War, and that's known as the Phoenix program. There are books, articles galore on that. But now we're seeing it being directed against the civilian population in earnest over the past 20 years. But now, since we've been wising up to it, thanks to InfoWars, ironically enough, and other shows, but now that we've educated ourselves on that, and David Icke, he's brought awareness, and many other, Wayne Madsen, you name it, Webster Tarpley, on and on and on. And you may have problems with any of these individuals or all of them, but nonetheless, it got us reading in these areas that are so important to our mass awakening. So he's the father of this notion, of this concept of cognitive dissonance, and it's still in use. The historians of psychology, of behavioral science, still draw on it. Now, let me give you a very, very brief, because I'm running out of time, very brief rundown. He taught at MIT. Okay, enough said. People here in the chat, all I have to do is say MIT, and you know the rest of the story. Then Minnesota, of course, right? We're home of the Minnesota multiphasic inventory, personality inventory, which, by the way, about 90% of law enforcement officers take that test to this day. They want a certain type who are going to be policing us. They're not going to be policing for us for long, because, as you know, there's a move afoot. There's going to be psycho policing that's going to replace the physical police department. Then he went to the New School of Social Research, and then I mentioned before he wound up at Stanford. This is Festinger we're talking about. Now, by the 1960s, Festinger had busted out of just his academic superstardom, and he crossed over into superstardom amongst the educated public, because he was getting articles published in Scientific America. Fortune magazine proclaimed Festinger as being one of the top scientists, not behavioral scientists, but one of the top scientists of the modern age. This is Fortune magazine, where all the Wall Streeters and the wannabes read it, right? And Fortune magazine, by the way, that's a Luce publication, L-U-C-E, as in Henry Luce, right? Henry Luce, as in Yale University, as in Skull and Bones. Yes, that Luce. So you can see all these different institutional tie-ins that go into the Lionel Festinger persona, right? And I'd go further. I'd say that Festinger has to be included in that cohort, and he's came a little bit before, half a generation previously. This is Festinger. He has to be included, though, amongst these people that we hear about ad nauseum from Johnny-come-latelys like Annie Jacobson, that particular team. We hear about Martin Orr, right? Ewan Cameron, Louis Jolyon West. And more recently, we were hearing about Henry Murray, who was at Harvard. That's where Ted Kaczynski was shaped into this serial assassin, anti-technology. He came out of a psychology grooming program at Harvard University. Take a look at the book by Alston Chase, Harvard and the Unabomber. I've talked about it many times before. But the point is that Festinger, remember that name, Festinger has to be mentioned whenever you name check these other people. You might even argue that he's more important. I mean, it's not as dramatic as Ewan Cameron with the psychic driving, or Johnny West, with his elephant experiments, or even Jose Delgado with his stem cedar, right? I mean, it's all dramatic. LSD, oh yeah, we want to dump on the counterculture. So, but Festinger, I believe trumps all of them. All these people that we usually talk about are the offspring, the illegitimate bastard children of Festinger. They're legitimate in the academic world, but they're still bastards. All right. Further, okay, this is also what helps me understand the importance of Festinger. I looked up his honors thesis at City College of New York. By the way, City College of New York, and if you look at any intellectual history, you'll know it. That's where the neocons come out of. Most of them were Trotskyists. They were Marxists. They were communists. They came from families like Festinger. They were like second generation Jews, and their immigrant parents were typically Zionists, communists, and labor organizers and anti-capitalists, right? They're red diaper babies, as they're called. So Festinger comes out of that City College of New York, where Irving Howe and any number of people who went into the journals of opinion like Dissent and New Republic and whatnot, and they joined forces with the White Shoe Boys, right? The Vandenheuvel type of old America, who wanted a totalitarian single one world government, and they said, "Yeah, we'll bring in you Trotskyists here because we're all for the same outcome, which is one world, United Nations, UN, NATO caliphate, where everybody's going to be under a system of permanent cognitive dissociation. They won't know which side is up, bipolar, negative and positive, right? So that's where he comes out of. And then when he goes to University of Iowa, and there's another connection, you're probably already ahead of me. University of Iowa, when he goes there for grad school for his PhD studies, he studies with Kurt Lewin. Otherwise, no, he Americanized his name. Kurt Lewin, he anglicized it. And again, he is one of the emigre pre-paperclip German Jewish intellectuals who were brought in. So, because paperclip, right? You think, okay, it's an Aryan thing. It's a bunch of German Nazis. They hate Jews. But there was there's a parallel stream, and this stream, intellectual stream, were almost exclusively Jews who were leaving. Guess what? The Third Reich. It was getting hot there. Kurt Lewin, who I'll use his anglicized version, Kurt Lewin, he wanted to change his name, and he became a U.S. citizen in 1940. All right, but he's out of the University of Berlin, state-of-the-art science, including psychology, what later became known as mind control, right? Pharmaceuticals, you name it. Incredible research. And that's why they were, by the way, Germany was seen as such a threat to the British Empire. Many reasons, but that's what the intellectual supremacy of German science was one of the major threats, right? So, but he came to the US in 1930, and he was the mentor of none other than later Professor Festinger. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention his thesis at City College, right? The title is telling. It's Experiments in Suggestibility. Experiments in Suggestibility, 1939 honors thesis. Yeah, I know he was only undergraduate, but still, it shows you that he was looking at suggestion, right? That brings in hypnosis. We've been talking about hypnosis. We were talking about Sirhan Bishara Sirhan. We were talking about the assassination of Robert Kennedy. It's a science, ladies and gentlemen. It's a behavioral science. And they've extended, they meaning the Illuminists, have extended it to include us, not just Sirhan Bishara Sirhan, of the person who was blamed, but didn't actually, according to Lisa Pease and others, didn't pull the trigger. He did pull the trigger, but there were blanks. All right. Okay, I have a whole workup on Kurt Lewin or Lewin, and I think I'm gonna have to save that for later because I'm running out of time. Suffice to say, in the case of Professor Kurt Lewin, and by the way, I studied him as an undergraduate. We studied Festinger. We did the Milgram and all of it. That's like grad school fodder, or even if the master's degree, you have to study all the pioneers. You have to study the history of your own profession before they let you out loose and start doing your own crazy stuff. At least I did the crazy stuff. The other people stayed on track and followed in the line of these people. But I was listening to music, remember? So their frequencies didn't really take hold on me. I was listening to my own different drummer. Um, but I'll just suffice to say that just leave it at this: that Levin helped. Well, he didn't found. He wasn't one of the founders, but he was one of the first generation pioneers of none other than the Tavistock Institute. Enough said. We don't need to go any further than that. That's Kurt Lewin, and then you got Leon Festinger after that, and on and on and on. All right. So this is an interesting reminder of me. Festinger, along with two other individuals from the same social background, their parents were all immigrant Jews from the Pale, the Russian Pale, or who are atheists. They were ardent socialists, if not outright communists, and anti-czarist, anti-capitalist, and all that. And it's interesting that these individuals who later got PhDs and went into professions went into dissociative studies, right? These are the people who are creating the communism of the intellect, communism of the mind, communism of affect, and communist of behavior, right? It's not an accident. There's a continuity of agenda there that's not really been fully explored by people who are doing intellectual history. I'm sharing this insight with you. You're getting it before any other people in the academic world have even conceived of that continuity of agenda. So they did this book together, the three of them, Festinger and his colleagues, called When Prophecy Fails, published in 1956, University of Minnesota Press. There we go again, the Minnesota connection. Always look at the land grant schools. Yeah, I know Stanford and Yale and Harvard and Columbia, they get all the play, but as I've been saying for at least 2 years publicly, check out and it's not just because I taught at a land grant school or that the UC is a land grant institution, but that's where all the action is, because you're dealing with animal experimentation and, of course, human experimentation. The other, the other elite institutions are primarily about experimentation with money and Wall Street, experimenting with your money, your labor, your capital. That's what they do. But the land grant schools do the spade work, literally, with the plants and the animals. So they did this book. Now, why do I mention this? I think, as far as I can remember, correct me if you're a UFOologist or if you're familiar with the literature, chapter, line, and verse. I've read a lot of it, but I'm not an expert. But nobody, it could be Joseph Farrell or Richard Dolan. These are people who've written incredible books, and this is no knock on them. But I'm saying that they do not look at Leon Festinger. They do not cite When Prophecy Fails. And you would think that they would, because the premise of the book was the study of religion based upon UFO sightings. This was in 1956, right? And there was a lot going on in New Mexico in 1950. This is when the sightings were taking place, right? You know the story. You know about Area 51, and later you know about Project Bluebeam, which the Johnny-come-latelys are in. Oh yeah, there's a fake alien invasion, UFO invasion that's going to be rolled out any day to cripple Americans in the world and force us to go into one world government. Well, tell me something new. You're just reading some material and talking about it on InfoWars and calling yourself an authority on it. Okay. But anyway, even the real legitimate authorities like Richard Dolan and Joseph P. Farrell, and there are others, I'm not going to name check all of them, but these are two names that most of you are familiar with. They did not talk about the Seekers. This group that Festinger and crew investigated was called the Seekers. They called themselves the Seekers, and it was run by a woman who lived in Chicago who formed this religious group. You can call them a cult, whatever makes you comfortable, predicting that the world was going to end by flood, biblical, right? As a result of these UFO contacts, these UFO sightings. But what happens is the day came of the prophecy. The day came of, and it passed. Nothing happened. But Festinger was trying to figure out, hey, you know what? They didn't break up. This group, the Seekers, got stronger and they brought more people in. So he said, that's cognitive, doesn't make any sense. I'm going to check this out. Of course, he never considered the fact that maybe the Seekers themselves were a psyop. Maybe they were, 1956, early 50s, let's say. They were already doing, they meaning the Office of Naval Intelligence and CIA or OSS were doing this type of work. And by the way, I'm sure, I haven't checked it out again. I want you to do it. I think Festinger was getting funding from those sources as well. And I do know for a fact, because he admits it in the foreword of this book, When Prophecy Fails, that the funding for this research talking about this cult called the Seekers, this UFO cult called the Seekers, came from, guess where? The Ford Foundation. Need I say more? By the way, Robert McNamara, who worked under the Kennedy and the LBJ administrations as the Secretary of Defense, who came out of Ford, right? Ford Corporation, the globalist company, and then became the Secretary of Defense to help American industry destroy Vietnamese, Cambodian, Laotian people, including 2 American young men who fought there for the industrial order. He later he went over to the Ford Foundation after he resigned from public life. He said, I'm going to go into altruism. I'm going to be the director of the Ford Foundation. And that gives you some idea of Festinger's connection with these elite groups. No wonder Fortune magazine, Henry Booth Luce, Henry Skull and Bonesman Booth is promoting Festinger. No wonder Scientific American is promoting him. So check out that book. I think I have a PDF. If I do, I'll share it with my Patreon supporters because it's out of copyright and I'm not breaking it. You might be able to find it on your own. I don't want you to have to pay for it because the prices are astronomical because it's out of print. So the prices are astronomically out of reach for most people. But it's an important book if you're interested. So I told you about the Ford Foundation, and since I only have 4 minutes left, let me wrap up with Stuart Weiss. It's spelled Vyse, and according to his own description in this article, it's titled "When QAnon Prophecy Fails." Does that sound familiar? Yes. I'll read it again. "When QAnon Prophecy Fails" by Stuart Weiss. It was published earlier this year, February 2021, in the Skeptical Inquirer, right? That should tell, or Skeptical Inquiry. That should tell you what that magazine is. Probably funded by some foundation or intelligence. But what it does is attack anybody who is remotely on the right of the political spectrum and anybody who's remotely in touch with metaphysics, UFOs, definitely you're going to be under attack, or psychic phenomena or psi. They're going to attack you. And Stuart Weiss is one of their newly discovered pit bulls in order to go in on people. But he describes himself as a psychologist. He wrote a book called Believing in Magic, The Psychology of Superstition, right? He's all these all they have to do is really look at the signs and they'll drop these superstitions, hesitancy over bioweapons. They'll just drop it. It's just a superstition. It's just being put out there by these alarmists out on the internet. And so he has his credibility in the American Psychological Association. He also has the dubious, in my view, distinction of being appointed a fellow with the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry as of 2015. And just to show you my skepticism about skeptical inquiry, the luminaries include, these are his fellow luminaries, and that's the term that they use in their own self-description, the Committee of Fellows. It includes people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, right? That science whore on PBS, right? Hey, I don't know who Eugenie Scott is. I know who Richard Dawkins is. Yeah, he's a famous academic atheist. I have his books. And I don't have any by Neil deGrasse Tyson because I want to read something of substance, not just some fabricated PBS bull. And then Bill Nye is a fellow. You know him. He's the pencil-necked geek with the bow tie. And he doesn't even have a back. He's not even a scientist. He's an actor/comedian, but he's a luminary. He's a illuminist for the Committee on Skeptical Inquiry. And the final one is the great James Randi, right? He started out as a magician, and he's the guy that supposedly debunks all these psychic phenomena, tricks, these magic. That's who Professor Weiss, I think he's the University of Connecticut, and is trained in psychology, is debunking, right? So who does he name here as being the source of the problem? Let's see here. It's called when skeptical when QAnon prophecy failed, as in the book title of Professor Festinger. He starts out with, guess what? He starts out with a photo, the article of that guy with a buffalo head, right? That actor, and the entire psyops. And he talks about Trump as being responsible for all that. What he doesn't realize, maybe he does realize, is that Trump was probably in on that. Trump was part of that negative polarity of the positive bipolar dialectic that's required to dissociate people. But he's blaming Trump, of course, and they blame, Alex Jones and InfoWars and Owen Schroyer and everybody else. But they're all in on it. They're part of this. Well, I don't have to tell you this, so I'm just going to leave it at that, especially since my time is up. But if you're on Patreon, I sent you a link to that article anyway, and you can read through it. I posted it not in the hopes that you think that that's my belief. I'm just showing you what the other side is telling us, and then we get upset supposedly by reading this, which is part of the plan. We're supposed to rise to the bait, and then therefore push us deeper and deeper into this dissociative state, this bipolar state, by this type of writing, this type of criticism. And that's how Professor Leon Festinger, many years after his death, is still holding sway over our mind and our behavior, right? So now that now that I know, and spread this information, we know their MO, their modus operandus. And now we can break it down. We can explore the frequencies. We can go around them. We can subvert it. We can hack it. We can come up with our own healthful activities, workarounds, alternatives. We don't even have to critique them. We don't have to destroy them. I do agree with whoever said that. Don't bother trying to criticize them, take them down, destroy them, or say, please rescue us, please, study the science, Mr. Dr. Paul, and then maybe you'll help us. We don't have to worry about it. Let's create our own institution, our own realities. That's where it comes from anyway. That's where it's these institutions ostensibly, not just ostensibly, but politically, metaphysically, that's where they draw their power from anyway. We, the people, the human beings, right? It's God's law. It's not man's law. It's ordained from a higher source called God. Yes. So with that, I wish you again a happy new year. And I will be there at the premiere on New Year's Day. I'm boycotting the Super Bowl. All right. The Doritos Bowl. I'm boycotting it. And I'll be there with you. And I'll enjoy that conversation with none other than the great author, Kirby Summers. So thank you very much. Don't forget to watch us an hour from now on us being John O'Loughlin, my friend and colleague, on Macduff Lives. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you soon. Bye.